Good morning, Jim Laird here from Largo, Florida. Hope you're having a great morning. First of all, I want to start off with an apology. I apologize. Yesterday we had some issues with the webinar. Our internet froze up. It's funny here. We get, especially in the afternoons, we end up getting a lot of internet, just a lot of bugs in the internet here in Tampa. So, and I know a couple other people that are having the same issues we are with their internet kind of freezing up. So we are going to be redoing that webinar we did yesterday. We have everyone that's registered for it. We have their emails. So when we reschedule that, we will send an email out to you so you can check it out. So thank you for tuning in, and we apologize. We apologize for that. So yesterday, I did a really interesting interview with Mike Cobb from ECI Development, where we're doing our retreat in Nicaragua. Check that out if you're interested. We talked about, a lot of people get the wrong impression when it comes to Nicaragua, and so that will be that'll be helpful for you if you're interested in going, because we get a lot of questions. We're getting a lot of emails about the retreat, especially since it's like, it's coming up fast. November, December, January, boom, the retreat's here. It's crazy how fast this year has gone by. So this morning's topic, I've just gotten done, and the AI Huberman Attia Melatonin Warning. I didn't notice.
Warming?
It should be warning.
Don't you guys just love Jim's little spelling errors?
Well, this is actually the AI spelling error, because I got this.
I misspelled that.
Well, the AI did it, but it ranks like when you rank it in search, it's like off the chart for searching. So I just not a great proofreader.
Whatever it is.
That's not one of my
melatonin warming. I'm trying to figure out what melatonin warming would be.
Yeah, so warming your melatonin up before you take it is not a good idea.
Doesn't make it work any better.
But I was just telling them how yesterday we had some internet shenanigans with our webinar, and we're going to be redoing.
You can't use that word with multiple contexts like that, Jim. It sounds weird.
Okay, internet technicalities, problems with
our internet connection. It was cutting
issues.
Yeah.
So we're going to be redoing that. We'll send an email out to the people that registered for the webinar, and then but you need to get on our email list, because next week we have another webinar, and I think it's has something to do with testosterone, because we have to go back and redo one of the testosterone modules that we did from before. So that'll be a good one. So this tweet that's in the description is basically, in a nutshell, Peter Attia talks about how a lot of melatonin supplements have a lot more melatonin in them than they say. And then Huberman retweets it, and like, this is because Huberman's not a big fan of melatonin. Neither is Dr. Jack Cruz. So what, everybody kind of has a different opinion on this. And I know you use, in your practice, in appropriate situations, you will use high dose. I used high dose melatonin to help my sleep, from recovering from a head injury, to help my sleep get going in the right direction. So could you give us some context? I know Huberman has a video where he talks about a certain study that basically talks about melatonin causes chemical castration, essentially. So give us your take.
So
Doctor.
The literature on this can be spun in a way that if you don't understand what actually happens with patients, you can get very confused. So I saw one of these clips. Somebody sent it to me, and she said, "What do you think about this?" And it's a clip of Huberman talking about, I think it was on Rogan, about how melatonin will cause a Siberian hamster's gonads nuts to shrivel up from like the size of a marble to the size of a grain of sand. A grain of rice, not sand.
That's a big
That's
difference.
actually very normal for Siberian hamsters, because the Siberian hamster doesn't want to be bringing young into the world when it's negative 80 degrees on the Kamchatka Peninsula and there's no sunlight, right? So you have to understand, you have to think about this in terms of, well, what does this animal do and where does it live and how does melatonin work in that environment? So melatonin helps seasonally breeding mammals like Siberian hamsters, polar bears, caribou, elk figure out when to make babies, so they don't bring babies into the world in the middle of a snowstorm. And that's very important, right? Like if they screw that up, everything is over. those animals would go extinct if they didn't have a good, solid seasonal breeding schedule. Humans are weird in that we break a lot of rules. And we are not seasonally breeding mammals, but we live in places where all the other mammals are seasonal breeders. If you look very hard at the literature, you'll find some studies that show that humans have a seasonal pattern of reproduction in high latitudes. Finland, Norway, Sweden is where this data comes from, such that would suggest there's more sexual activity during like June, July, and August, or June. When the days are longer, there's more resources are abundant. You have more time to get into shenanigans, right? And then 9 months later,
people are wearing less clothes.
People wearing less clothes, right? And then 9 months later, the babies are born in April, May. That's a very slight increase, for the record. It's not that big of a deal. And in some studies, you won't even see it. You'll see the same thing with the testosterone literature. There's not a seasonal variation in testosterone in men, at least in as far as we've been able to measure it. And I would point out that this has only been possible since the advent of artificial light. So I'm not convinced that there's not a seasonal variation. I've just never seen anyone document it. So melatonin does suppress sex steroid hormones. However, we may not be able to infer that, say, 10 milligrams or 20 milligrams or 5 milligrams of extra melatonin a night is going to suppress your sex steroid hormones in the real world. I've never seen anyone do that study either. And even if it did, how big of a deal would it be? Would it not be transient? You can do things, and people do things like go into what we call darkness meditations, where they'll spend 48 hours in complete darkness, during which your melatonin levels steadily rise until finally another enzyme system gets activated that creates, I think it's called the spirit molecule, and the actual name for it escapes me. But you will go into a hallucinogenic state, or you'll start hallucinating, I should say, because you're producing a hallucinogen from melatonin within your own body. So, then those people have never reported, hypogonadism or low testosterone or low sex steroid hormones after that.
Yeah, we can ask Aaron Rodgers about that.
Oh, that's right. He did the darkness meditation, didn't he? I remember hearing about that.
He did like 3-4 days in complete darkness.
Yeah.
That's
crazy. All of this context is important because, I've never seen anyone take melatonin and have it meaningfully impact their hormone profile. And that's not to say that it's not possible, but I've never seen it. I've never heard of it. Where is the evidence? We've had melatonin as a supplement for 20, 30 years. People have been using high doses of melatonin for a long time now. Maybe someone will eventually find somebody where this happens. There's one case report of a guy, a very teenager, who didn't go through puberty, and they couldn't figure out why. And they finally went back and ran a melatonin level, and it turned out that he had enormously high melatonin levels, even in the middle of the day. His mechanism for suppressing melatonin that's dependent upon light in all of us must have been broken. So they actually gave him exogenous testosterone and exogenous hormones to artificially push him through puberty. And then at follow-up years later, he was able to come off of these things and have a natural hormone production, at least from what I recall. But that's one case report, one person who's very unusual, and who knows why that happened to them. So all of that gives you hopefully some context of there's no real danger to melatonin. It's all hype. Now, that's the danger, right? At least short term. Is there potentially more long-term problems, or are there contexts where I'd be more wary? I've never had reason to use melatonin in a child, ever. And I'd be wary of that, because if melatonin suppresses puberty, which we believe it does, then we should be very wary of using it in kids, because you might prolong their
and a 10 milligram dose for a kid is like,
it's a lot. You would not want to do
that. It's like a kid, like parents don't understand. Like if you get a kid, like a 3-year-old, 2-year-old, like an entire apple, that is like a massive dose of sugar, or like, caffeine too. Like,
So the dose matters, and the duration matters. I'd be shocked if there's ever been any child harmed by 1 or 2 nights of melatonin for restlessness.
Yeah.
The other thing that people need to know is that, and think about, is people are running around saying, oh, well, melatonin is dangerous. Well, your cell phone suppresses melatonin production in your body. And if melatonin
Right.
is responsible for making childhood the appropriate duration and delaying puberty, then could cell phones shift the age of menarche forward? Could girls go through menarche earlier? Could boys go through puberty earlier?
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
I'm very concerned. I'm much more concerned about the use of cell phones by kids than melatonin by far.
Well, but the problem is these parents, and I read an article about this. These
Mm,
parents are like, the kids are on, screens all day. They never go outside. Their circadian rhythms mess. They just we give them pop them melatonin at night, and out they go. That's the
sad.
problem, is that people are, living an indoor life and then trying to use melatonin to fix it. Like, it's just like, it's like people we deal with in the practice that are like, working 60 hours a week. They're, why am I tired? Put
Yeah.
me on TRT, put me on this, put me on that,
Yeah.
instead of addressing the fact that they need to do a better job of taking care of themselves. Right.
Absolutely. It's a disaster. And so the other context, right, would be melatonin in middle life,
Hmm.
or anywhere from, let's say, 20 to 50. I rarely have ever used it in those age ranges for more than a short period of time, nights to weeks.
A reset.
Yeah, and you did that. And you were actually the first person where I recommended melatonin at a much, much higher dose. And it worked. And it really, I mean, you tell people what a difference it made for you.
Well, I literally couldn't sleep for more than 3 hours, and
Right.
I had had a head injury, and he said, start taking melatonin. So I went, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, nothing, 120. And then it didn't
Yeah.
really have an effect until about, I got over 300. And then
Right.
it got me from 3 hours in sleep a night to like 6 to 7.
Right.
Right. And I'm still working on getting my sleep as good as it was before my accident. But it definitely got me going in the right direction. It gave me a
Right.
nice little kick. Right.
And
So,
who knows how head injuries affect melatonin levels? I've never looked into that. But the bottom line here, right, is that Jim was in a bad place with his sleep. If you can't sleep, you can't really heal. And
right.
if you've ever struggled with sleep, you know how crazy making that is. It will make you
Mhm.
crazy if you can't sleep. In
Cray
fact,
cray.
it's one of the most reliable and one of the most, I think, cruel forms of torture is sleep deprivation.
That is correct.
So it took Jim from really struggling with his sleep to at least being able to get a night of rest. And, there's all this data on the rejuvenating powers of melatonin, which is part of why I use it in acute injuries, people with colds, flus. That's why guys like Pierre Corey and Paul Merrick have been using it for years in acute illness. So, that's where there's a place for it. Acute problems in middle life, definitely. And then the other place I'll use it is in people who are in later life. And the reason why I'm not so worried about it there is that, I'll have women come in who are having debilitating hot flashes, and a little bit of melatonin, and it's not a little bit in relative terms, but 10, 20, 30 milligrams, and all of a sudden those hot flashes are gone. Uh, I've seen that more than once. Now, I never use that lightly. It's almost always in a situation where somebody says, "Look, I'm totally exhausted. I need an out." And I'm always very clear with them, as Jim was saying, we really want people to understand that this is not about taking a pill forever. It's about taking a pill now to get a result you need so that you can get your life and your lifestyle and your diet in order. Because, and then that's where, I've had a couple people who just stayed on it because they weren't really willing to manage their stress and reduce the amount of work they were doing and kind of get things under control. But that's life.
It is. Thanks for tuning in today, everyone. We got a busy day ahead of us.
We do.
Get on the email
Thanks
list.
everyone
Go
for
over to
watching.
Stillman. Get over to stillmanwellness.com. Put your email in so you'll get notifications for our webinars that we don't share on YouTube. And have yourself a great weekend. Make sure you get outside.